Hi, and welcome to Truth Shall Come Forth. This is the first episode in the new podcast series, Red Pill Truth for Ex-Mormons, where we'll be discussing what belongs in the trash and what doesn't. This is the Truth Shall Come Forth channel. Please like, subscribe, and share for updates and future episodes. My name is Joseph Abreu, and if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can do so at truthshallcomeforth@gmail.com. If you are currently Mormon or if you are currently attending church, I strongly recommend that you go look at a different podcast series that we have out for you. One is specifically been created for people who are still in the church or starting to question some things. And the name of that podcast series is called Correcting Mormon Doctrine. There's already 10 episodes in there. And I encourage you to, turn this off here, go look at that, go read through those, and then probably come back and understand a little bit more if that doesn't answer everything for you. But if you've left the church, if you consider yourself an ex-Mormon, if you aren't going, if you've, been kicked out or whatever, you're on the outside of that, this whole podcast series has been created just for you. When people, before I get any further, let me let you know ahead of time. I will not refer to these men as apostles or prophets. Why? Because Christ himself does not refer to him in that manner. He calls them shepherds. They are not listening to him. So rest assured, you can kind of see where this is going to be going, but I'm going to be helping you understand exactly what belongs in the trash and what doesn't. When people discovered that the church, the LDS church, and I've made this specifically kind of towards the LDS church, even though there's a lot of different groups that Mormon could have come out of, but predominantly they're going to be people out of the LDS church. When you discover that the church is not true, there's a tendency to just take everything and want to throw it all into the trash. From the beginning to the end, just take it and huck it. In even sometimes the New Testament and the Old Testament, just huck religion and God and Christianity and Christ and all of that and just take it and be done with it. So that is the whole reason that we have created this series. Many things rightfully do belong in the trash can, but not everything. And I'm going to help you figure out and sort through those things. There's a lot of information that's come to us through other records of what's correct and what's not correct, and it will all start to make sense and fall in place. So if you are ex-Mormon, yes, this podcast series has been created just for you. Red Pill Truth for Ex-Mormons. First thing I'd like you to know, these these 5 records that I pictured up here, the Book of Mormon, the New Testament, Ayat Kuyat Nemenha, the Mamuini, and the Book of Remembrance of Moses, all of them condemn the leaders of the LDS Church and the temples. I'll repeat that. All of these records condemn the LDS leaders and the temples. Most people don't realize what the Book of Mormon says. And I know a lot of people have left the church, and first tendency is throw Joseph Smith in the trash, throw the Book of Mormon in the trash. And they don't realize what the Book of Mormon is actually able to tell them. The Book of Mormon actually condemns the LDS church and the LDS temples. Christ himself tells us the early saints will sin against the gospel. He talks about the fall of the church, the prideful and stiff-necked people, the temples being built for their own pride, the leaders being money hungry and hoarders. The list goes on and on and on and on. There's so much in there. I'd have pages and pages of this, but I'll need you to go read it for yourselves, but with new eyes, and it'll start to make sense. This shouldn't surprise you. Christ himself prophesies about the fall of the church. Paul the apostle in Thessalonians wrote that the apostasy would precede the second coming and that the Antichrist would be in the temples in the last days. So this is in Thessalonians 2, verses 1 to 5. Go read it. but he's talking about the apostasy preceding the fall of the preceding the preceding the second coming, apostasy preceding the second coming, and the Antichrist being in the temples in the last days. And you don't have to ask or think very hard, but ask yourself this, like, how many churches have temples? There's not too many. It doesn't leave much for question. There really aren't that many churches out there that have temples. So there should already have been, if you read the New Testament, there should already have been a red flag, like, maybe these guys aren't who we think they are. Maybe this is a temple, but Antichrist is supposed to be in the temple. How's that supposed to happen? In the Book of Mormon, there's further evidence. The great and spacious buildings that you've heard so much about in Lehi's dream, and also in just later on in Nephi tells us about it as well. But these great and spacious buildings, these talking about the temples. There's no foundation. The foundation is in the air, meaning they're not built on solid ground. They're not built on God. Another thing that you should know right off the bat is not okay. You pay to enter these things. You pay with your tithing. If you don't tithe, you don't go in. If you do tithe, then you can go in. You pay to enter. Call it however you want it, but that's how this system has been working. Christ himself tells us that he does not enter them. He does that in several other books, and I'll be going over some of those. These are buildings that have been built to attract attention, almost acknowledgement to themselves and their accomplishments, and how they're sort of patting themselves on the back on how close they are to God, and all these things. Yet they themselves tell us that they haven't seen Christ or God or Heavenly Father or angels or anything. In that dream that Lehi had, he, the people inside the buildings are mocking those that are outside, that are doing it differently from them, and they think that they are saved because they're in these great and spacious buildings, and they're having a great time and just joyous and whatnot. And how many people do you know that they go to the temple and they kind of brag about it and pat themselves on the back, and, oh, we've done such a good thing, and we're doing the work of the Lord, and it's not the Lord's work at all. They're doing their own work that they're deciding to do. So we'll be discussing more about that, but Nephi tells us basically all about the church problems in the last days. I was supposed to get two more things in here in the middle, but you can go ahead and read. There's probably 15 or 20 things you can put in here. But go ahead and read Second Nephi chapters 26 to 30 all over again. But read it with new context, read it with new eyes. He's talking about the church. He's talking about the temples. He's talking about these shepherd leaders in the last days, and how they're going to be handling things, how they're doing everything for money and getting of gain, and they're hoarding money, and they're not helping the poor. They've already replaced God's law with their own. That was tithing. They got rid of, the law of consecration. When God asked them to live the consecration, they didn't. And then they said, we'll just replace it with this. We'll replace it with tithing. God didn't say that was okay. He didn't allow it. He didn't give them the go ahead. They did it on their own. These men, they counsel us to follow them. They esteem their words to be above of old prophets and to be more important than ancient prophets. They do not teach us to seek Christ's face. In actuality, if anybody has said that they have saw the face of Jesus Christ or saw the face of the Father, they kick them out of the church. And then the last thing is Christ and God do not lead them. These men they're like blindfolded. They're just banging around from wall to wall. They're making decisions, yes, but they're not making decisions based upon Christ and God leading them. They are very much playing almost pin the tail on the donkey with blindfolds on. You might ask yourself, what revelation has come to these men since the day of Joseph Smith? Well, 2-hour church, is that revelation enough? Going from 3-hour to church to 2-hour church, does that qualify? Anyways, I encourage you go back and read these chapters. You'll probably be falling in love with the Book of Mormon all over again, simply knowing that all this stuff was there, that they counseled to us and told us about these things that you were unaware of. So I'll be making a new episode. This is not going to be in this podcast series. It'll be in the other one, correcting Mormon doctrine, talking about the temples being broken, what's supposed to be working, what's not working, that sort of thing. For certain, we have temples. For certain, we have ordinances, but they're not the same as what they used to be. We know that from other records. One of the records that tells us what's supposed to be in the temples is the Sayat Kuyat Nemenha. This is a record of Haggis people. Haggis people departed out of the land of Zarahemla in Alma 63. Thousands and thousands of them went north. Alma 63 verses 4 to 10. And this is their book. And they ended up in the Salt Lake area, the land of salt. They sailed north. So this is their record. This is their thing. But one of the special things that it contains is the Nemenha. They had a temple, and the temple, it was called the Tuhal Numen, but they have a book called the Book of the Tuhal Numen, which contains all the words of the temple teachings and all the words of the temple ordinances. And guess what? There are more words, more information in the Book of the Tuhal Numen than you can get if you go and listen to the LDS endowment or any of the temple teachings that are there. There are things that are missing. There's understanding that is gone. What the LDS have is incomplete. And there are many key pieces which are missing from the LDS ordinances. These are available here. They teach you what they are. One of the purposes, when people pass through the veil at the temple, one of the things that's supposed to happen, you're going through the veil to enter into the presence of God and to be able to communicate with him and speak with him. And that doesn't happen, but it's because there's some significant things that are missing and some understanding that's missing, that if you don't make those connections, and you can't because it's not there, you can't make it from A to Z. There's too many letters missing in the middle of the alphabet there. So that just gives you an idea. But highly recommend this book as well. This book, they teach you a lot of things. One is going upon the way. Going upon the way, I've got already 4 episodes on this. I strongly recommend taking a look at episodes part B, which is 5B and 5C. They're in the Correcting Mormon Doctrine podcast series. You'll learn a little bit about the Way training program, which is really the endowment ceremony. But it's got a lot of things that are additional to it, and an understanding that's additional to it. Because when you go through, you're supposed to be learning how to go on the way and how to be in the presence of Jesus Christ, Heavenly Father, angels, your kindred dead, anybody that's passed before you. You're supposed to be able to go and communicate with them and learn from them and be taught from them. The Nemenha all did this. Everybody knew how to go on the way, but it's something that's been forgotten. We go through the endowment at the LDS Church just to check a box. Oh, we've done it. Now we can go to the next step. Oh, we've done it. Now we can go to the next step. But that's not what it was about. So rest assured, there's nothing that's important. If you've left the church, there's nothing that's important there. Temple recommend is as worthless as the paper it's been written on. And the temple itself, there's nothing that happens in there. Christ is not inside there. He tells us he's not in there. And you might be able to feel your ancestors in there from time to time, particularly in the baptistry or something, but you won't feel them in the upper rooms. They're just not there. So one of the first things that you should be looking at, and it'll kind of bug you when I say this, but you might want to look at what happened when Joseph Smith died. Now, he died June 27, 1844. And then as time went on, 6 groups have arisen out of all of that. The first one was actually the Strangites, the Church of Christ. And that was in 1844. That was the only one that began the same year that Joseph Smith died. So if you're looking for continuity, that was out of all of them, that was the only one that was even possible. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we'll call them LDS. I also call them Brighamites because it's kind of nice to know who they followed. Everybody wants to believe, oh, we're Joseph Smith. He's our founder. Well, all these groups claim that Joseph Smith was their founder. All of them claim to follow the doctrine that he taught and all of that. But yet, take a look at that number, 1847. 3.5 years later, it was like December. 3.5 years later, after Joseph Smith died, is when Brigham Young was announced as the president of the church. And you had a branch that created off of them later on, FLDS, one of the polygamy groups. That was in 1929. You have the Church of Jesus Christ, also known as the Temple Lot or the Cutlerite group. They formed in 1853. Restored Church of Jesus Christ, which is the RLDS, Joseph Smith III, so his son, that was founded in 1860. It's now the Community of Christ. You have the Church of Jesus Christ, founded by Sidney Rigdon, also known as the Bickertonites. Sidney Rigdon, after him, it was a guy named Bickerton, and he became really popular, and so it kind of took on that name instead of Rigdonites. But that was 1862. You've got the Church of Christ, or the Hedrickites. They split off, years later. There's got a group called Fettingites, and there's other groups, DeWolf, Dravies. One of those is the Church of Christ with Elijah Message. And then you've got Bronsonites, which have gone back to a Saturday Sabbath, recognizing that the Saturday is the seventh day, not Sunday, which is the first day. So you've got more groups and stuff. And then beyond what I've just listed here, there's 5 more branches that have risen just since 1988. There's 5 more groups. So there's quite a bit of variation out there, even though the large majority of that is, Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints, the LDS, the Brighamites. And like I say, all of them, they're claimed to be founded by Joseph Smith, claimed to be led by God. Most of them have apostles, prophets. There's one that they don't have a prophet. They just have a quorum. Most have temples. Most have temple marriages or sealings. So they're all fairly similar. But, none of them are actually really correct. But you really want to, look back at Brigham Young and the LDS. Joseph Smith died on June 27, 1844. 3.5 years later, Brigham Young is sustained as the president. He's not sustained as the prophet. That terminology, people calling him a prophet, happened years later. But he was sustained as the president of the church on December 27, 1847. So you gotta ask, what's up with the 3.5 year gap? So the cool thing is, after Brigham Young, they figured out, hey, this isn't gonna work. How are we gonna pick the next guy? We just saw the biggest debacle where it took us 3.5 years to get somebody into a position. So now they've adopted this tradition where the next oldest serving member, when that person that they claim to be in the prophet position, when he dies, the next oldest serving member of the quorum, well, he becomes prophet. And you're told that God selects who he wants. He selects the next prophet by simply eliminating the others. This should just make you laugh inside. It's you hear it and you're like, really? Like, God's gonna go kill people now? Okay. And they'll just tell you, well, it was just his time. That's how he selects. That's how he selects his prophet. He just chooses who he wants to be the next prophet, and then he makes them prophet. Okay, go ahead with that. But it isn't right. But it probably is better than the way that the Catholics do it, where they go out and look for white or gray smoke, or white or black smoke. Anyways, what did Joseph Smith do? He went out to pray in a grove to find out which church to join. What did God tell him? He told him to join none of the churches, told him that none of them were correct. So, in contrast, what is the LDS church? If you're a prospective member or an investigator, what are they going to tell you to do? They're going to tell you pray about. What are they going to tell you to pray about? They're going to tell you pray about the Book of Mormon. If the Book of Mormon is true, then Joseph Smith is a prophet. And if Joseph Smith is a prophet, then the church is true. This, it doesn't take a lot of smarts to know that this is a circular argument and it's not really A leads to B, B leads to C, A is true, therefore C is true. It's not quite like that. And we've already discussed like how many churches were out there that believe in the Book of Mormon. All of them, all of the Mormon churches, all of the branches, all of that. How many had prophets? All of them. How many had temples? Most all of them. So that circular logic thing shouldn't go. And just because the Book of Mormon is true doesn't make the rest of it true. Now, I had the fortunate experience of sitting down with missionaries at the first time, and we read the Book of Mormon, and we read the famous passage where Christ comes, and they're like, "Well, will you?" After reading that, they're like, "Will you pray about it?" I'm like, "No, I know it's true, but that doesn't mean that the church is true, and that doesn't mean that these men are true prophets and apostles." I didn't even have a testimony of Joseph Smith or any of that. All I knew was the Book of Mormon's true. I wanted to learn more about the Book of Mormon is true. I'll keep attending this church. I'll keep coming here and keep learning and keep learning. And that's the way it should be. But what should you do? You should pray to find out which church to join or which church is there. You shouldn't go pray to find out if the Book of Mormon is true, and if the Book of Mormon is true, go join the LDS church. Should pray to find out which church is there to join. Joseph Smith actually set up the example. What should you do? Pray to know which church to join. What would have happened? He would have told you to join none of them. And then he would have said, come to me upon the way. So this is something that, we understand a lot more now that the Nemenhar record has come out, because now we have clear understanding of what the way is. People are doing it. We're going on the way. We're talking with Jesus Christ. We're talking with Heavenly Father. We're talking with Heavenly Mother. We're getting our answers straight from the source. There is not supposed to be a middleman. You do not look at somebody and say, "What do you think?" and then take their answer and go with it. You need to go straight to the source. You need to go straight to Him. He never taught you anywhere in the records to come to another person or to put another person between you and Him. You're supposed to go straight to Him. So there's other things that you might be concerned about. You may have seen the CES letter, and the CES letter certainly has a lot of information in it. For those that don't know, it's a letter that was written to the church educational system that was not returned, but the letter went ahead and somebody published it, put it into a book form. But they were asking questions. It was associated into, or not associated, it was assembled into 13 different portions. And each portion was asking different questions. And, one was asking about the Book of Mormon, the Book of Mormon translation, Joseph Smith's first vision. If you don't already know some of these questions or concerns, I'd be a little bit surprised, because people that are usually outside of the church have already run into a bunch of this stuff. We've already seen it. The Book of Abraham, the problems with that, polygamy, polyandry, the prophets, Kinderhook plates, the testimony, the spiritual witnesses, how they kept changing over the years, the priesthood restoration, and the witnesses again, the temples and some of the Freemasonry, how that looks similar, and then the science. And there's some other concerns. So there was this letter was formed into 13 different groups or 13 different sections. And it had like I say, there's a lot of truth in it, and there's some errors in it. One good thing for you to know is what happened to the guy that wrote this CES letter. Well, he obviously left the church, joined another group, left that, and now he's an atheist. So, like I say earlier, people have a tendency, if you can't get answers and you don't know how to get them, we have a tendency to just take everything and throw it in the garbage can. So, I don't know what portion of a testimony you have. You have a testimony of the Bible, you have a testimony of the New Testament, the Old Testament, Jesus Christ, Book of Mormon, all of those. There's a huge range of everything, but you need to get a testimony of each individual thing and know where that belongs. So, you might be at the point where you're thinking, hey, what's going on? I'm not sure if this is the true church or not. What about all these visions? What about the six churches? Or, what about having a prophet? There's the LDS will teach you there's only one prophet on the earth. If you go back and you go back into history, you're like, that's kind of weird. In the Book of Mormon, when Lehi left Jerusalem, there was eight. So why do we now have one? Why is our time less important than that time? That was just Jerusalem alone. There was eight. So things have been quite different. Certainly, if you look up and you've seen about the LDS and the child trafficking and things that are there, it's kind of dark, but I don't want let's not ignore it. It is there. It's there for sure. It's going to be coming out a lot this year. You also have, with the who killed Joseph Smith, you've got something like, well, questions about whether he was in the jail. If you've looked into all these massacres, Mountain Massacre, Battle Creek Massacre, Fort Utah, Aiken, and William McBride massacres, there's a lot of dark history in the church, and it should bring everybody pause to want to know more. So, yes, there are a lot of times when you're studying, sometimes it creates an answer, and sometimes it just creates a question, and you're not sure. And fortunately, like I say, there have been so many other records that have come to us that we have answers to these things now. So, was there polygamy or no polygamy? There's no polygamy. That's the way that it is. Is the LDS the true church or not? It's not the true church. Was the first vision correct? Well, which version? There's a bunch of them. But which of the six churches is correct? There's none of them that are correct. Was Joseph Smith a prophet? Yes, but he was not a high priest. And the books of remembrance will help clear out what that is and what the differences were. Um, you know, if you recall, like pretty much half your ward is high priest, right? It's all the old men, almost over 50 or whatever it is. And that's not ever the way that was. There's really only a couple high priests, and there's very few of them. Um, but anyways, all this stuff is out there, including temples. Where did the Freemasonry come in? Well, there's Brigham Young and company, but a lot of the temple ordinances and the signs and the symbols, they're not the same as what was given to the Indians, and is recorded in their records. They have different signs, different things, and when you put them side by side, they start to make more sense. You're like, there's no way it was this. Why are we looking at these? So if you haven't looked, there is, a two-part investigative documentary into who killed Joseph Smith. There's a part one and a part two. Highly encourage you to read them, or not read them, watch them. These are, an hour and a half each, so you got 3 hours invested in this. But it gives you it's a pretty thorough thing, and you'll come out kind of knowing, hey, it was somebody on the inside that did this, and it was probably to get the polygamy thing going. We had to eliminate the guy who was against it and opposed to it. So one of the records that come to us, this is from, it's called the Mamuini. And for those that don't know, the Indians, the Native Americans, this last year, they've just released 55, 60 records. The reason that you'll hear me call the people the shepherds of the church is because in this record, this is a record from uh, it's three different tribes. You have the Powhatan, the Ottawa, and the Ojibwe tribes, and those three tribes are in the Michigan area, the surrounding Great Lakes. But when Christ came to them, he actually prophesies of the state of the church in the last days, and he refers to them as false shepherds. So when you're ever you hear me in this this podcast series or in another one, whenever I'm on this channel, I'll be calling them the shepherds. This is why I'm calling them shepherds, because Christ himself calls them shepherds. And he tells us that the shepherds will build towers in my name, yet my feet will not walk within them. They will build tall and spacious buildings to draw the eyes of the nations. This just mimics more of what was said in the Book of Mormon, that what Lehi saw in his dream and what Nephi tells us in Second Nephi chapters 26 to 30. This just mimics the same thing. In the Ayat Kuyat Nemenha, this is once again back to the record of Haggis people from Alma 63, 4 to 10. The term shepherds is mentioned a total of 69 times. 67 of those, 67, 67 of those are referring specifically to the shepherds of the LDS leadership, and it's no question that it's the LDS leadership. It's impossible for it to be our LDS leadership. It's impossible for it to be FLDS leadership. There is no other leadership that it is possible that they are referring to. So when they saw our day and they prophesied about it. Now, good thing for you to know is Sam of the Lamanites in this record, Moroni's in this record. Two greats, Ponatan, another one named Manti, Haggith. All these people are in this record, and they testify boldly and strongly. They tell us what's going on. It's clear as a bell. They're talking about the LDS Church. So here you have another record, not just a record corroborating the history of the Book of Mormon, but a record corroborating the fall of the church and telling us all about it, even more details than you'll can ever imagine. I've gone ahead and made 2 videos just about the shepherds, and I apologize for them being lengthy, but God has a lot to say, and these men had a lot to say. I go ahead and I go through each verse, and we talk about what they're saying in those things. I've split it up into 2 parts, and it's pretty powerful. You won't leave wondering who these shepherds are. You'll leave knowing exactly who they are, how they took things over, and how they're just not paying attention and not being led by Christ and God. So I highly encourage you to go ahead and check those out. That's a faster way, I think, is making a video and letting you go through that. Faster way to do that than to read the book. I do recommend reading the book. The book itself is twice the size of the Book of Mormon. Took me 4 months to read it, and that was at a pretty quick pace. So it's kind of like reading the Book of Mormon in 2 months and then reading it again in another 2 months. And I know it's twice the size because I did a word count check on both of them. One other thing, Christ himself prophesies about the fall of the church. He tells us about it. We just didn't realize it was there, but he prophesied about it. And when did the fall happen? It didn't happen when Joseph Smith died. It happened before that. It happened when the church members, everybody as a whole, they sinned against the gospel, refusing to live with all things in common. This was the problem, and thereby rejecting the fullness of the gospel. So you don't get the fullness of the gospel. Fine, you want to live that way? Go ahead. The LDS would like to say that God replaced it with the law of tithing. No, he didn't. They'll tell you that too. They'll tell you that right all over the Nemenha record. They'll tell you that. What was the penalty of this choice not to live with all things in common? Well, it's not told to us in the Book of Mormon, but it is told to us in the Nemenha record by several different people. So it's not just one book here. It's in several different places throughout there. It's 6 generations of condemnation. So we're reading these records now because we're finally coming out of the condemnation for not living with all things in common, for making that choice to live that way. And that's why we're now getting the opportunity to progress and go forward again, getting the information of how to go on the way, how to go and communicate with Christ himself, how to get direction and revelation straight from them, the way that all the past prophets did. Oh no, I mean past. I mean not LDS prophets. I mean back in ancient times. That's how Moses was taught. That's how Noah was taught. That's how Enoch was taught. That's how Abraham was taught. They all went on the way and communicated with Heavenly Father face to face. So there's so much out there, especially like I say with this Ayat Kuyat Nemenhar record, um, where they just talk about all the corruption in the church and whatnot. So you've got things that belong in the trash. Don't put these in the trash. These tell you about what belongs in the trash. They, in addition to them telling us about all of that, I've gone ahead and made another video. This is a short one, just 10 minutes, but talking about the condemnation, the real reason. So I go back and I look through the Ayat Kuyat Nemenha, and I've assembled all the spots where they have talked about the condemnation and how we entered it and what caused it and how long it's going to be. I put that into a short videos for you so you can go ahead and view that. And what was the significance of this condemnation? When we entered the condemnation because we didn't live with all things in common, it's like we were grounded as a people or put on restriction. So what happened immediately? There's no revelation. God's not going to communicate. He's like, you're in timeout. Go sit in the corner. I'm not talking to you. Think about what you did. There's been no revelation since Joseph Smith. There's no guidance in any sort of prophet capacity whatsoever. There's been no corrections to any errors in their understanding. They keep making things, they change things a little bit here and there, but there's no corrections to any errors. These guys are on their own. Like I say, they're playing pin the tail on the donkey and they're blindfolded. There is also no visitations. So when I talked about Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ and all of us going on the way and learning how to be in their presence, there's none of that. And Dallin Oaks is on record acknowledging that none of the brethren have seen the Lord Jesus Christ or angels. If you want to go and hear that for yourselves, I encourage you to do so. All you need to do is Google Oaks and none of the brethren. If you search that up, you'll come to this video and you'll hear him. He's at a youth fireside and they're asking, hey, why don't we have any of these experiences anymore? Why isn't this experience that Alma the Younger had where they saw angels and his brother saw angels, why doesn't this type of thing happen anymore? And he just comes out and says, none of the brethren, none of us, none of the quorum, none of the 12, it just doesn't happen. We have not seen God, Christ, or angels. So these are his own words, and we have to take them at their own words. Why you're following people or why people are following people who are acknowledging for themselves that they have not seen these men, that they do not communicate with them is beyond me. Except that the train has been created and you're either on the train or you're off the train. You're taught that you're not good if you're not following them, but they're not following who they need to be following. So don't follow these guys. They don't know where they're going. So again, I talked a little bit about the records from the Native Americans. And beginning in 2025 at the spring equinox, they announced that they were going to be releasing all of their records. This is the Native American tribes together. We always kind of figured that they were separate, that each tribe was independent of the others. No, there's a whole national council and a grand council, and they all get together, and nobody does things without approval from the grand council. That's just how things work. They just don't talk to us and don't tell us and don't run it by us, but they have their own network and everything that's been going on. And they've had their spiritual records, the ones that were able to keep them, they've kept them for years and they're releasing them now. There's actually 11 here. The bottom three on the left are all the same book. The white one is a large print, soft cover. The black is a fine print, too small for me to read, soft cover. And then the red book is a fine print hardcover. But all those three are the same. Everything else is different. I've gone through about half of these so far. The UPPHAF, top right, that one comes from the Norse tribes, Norwegian. The one white Roloa, the Kipu Intipak, that is from the um, Peru. That's from Peru in South America. We've got records going to be coming from the Mayans. We've got records all over the place. But these records are additional testaments of Jesus Christ. One of the things that I loved about the Mamuini, which is on the bottom left, the White Book, is that finally I'm listening to um, parables that make sense. I was pretty disappointed reading the Book of Mormon for the first time. I wanted to go and read what Christ taught, and then it was like he's teaching the same stuff that he taught the people over in Europe in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Like what? Like this is kind of weird. Why is he teaching the exact same stuff? I mean, I know it's important, but it just seems like a regurgitated talk from the Eastern Hemisphere, now being spoken on the Western Hemisphere. But when you read the Mamuini, he's got the same messages in the parables, but the parables are entirely different. Each parable, like more than half of them, they've got a canoe or how to, starting a fire or keeping your water clean or, preserving your canoe or hunting grounds or, there's all these different things that are being taught, the same messages that are in the parables, but taught to in a totally different way with different words and different everything. And it makes a lot more sense because you're like, these are different people. They lived in canoes and teepees, and this was their life. They lived off the land. It wasn't quite the same way as it was over in Europe. So, you know, encourage you to go ahead and start looking into some of these. The center white emblem that looks like a little bird with a backwards high, kind of a bird drinking out of a cup. That is the not it's not an emoji, I don't think, but it's the picture of the app. So the app is available on both Apple Play or Apple Store and Google Play. It's available on both of those. And for like $9 a month, you can have access to all the records that they have. They don't have all the records out, but honestly, just getting through some of them, there's a lot of words that are in these things. All total, they estimate what they're bringing to the table at being around 10 to 12 times the volume of the Book of Mormon. So this is to give you an idea of what's out there. And like I said, you already have the Ayat Kuyat Nemenha, which is the record of Haggis people. That's twice the size of the Book of Mormon itself. A huge book. Um, what's the other cool thing is that the Indians, they know where all these things came from. They know where their different tribes, how they got there. The blue one, the blue line there, that is the Mamuini. That's how they arrived over. But they've got information on all of that. The red line is actually the Book of Mormon. That's how the Book of Mormon got to America. So they go ahead. They know where people settled based upon all their records. We kind of look like the Indians don't know what's going on, but they knew where everything was. Uh, they knew how the Inca or the Peru, how those people got there. Um, so that's all in there. So anybody that's at this point wanting to prove the Book of Mormon wrong or whatnot, they're going to start to have a hard time because all these other records that the Indians are just releasing are just doing the opposite. They're just proving that Lehi and his family came over. And they're not the only group that came over. As you see here, there was like a bunch of groups that came over in different directions. It's not the only record that's here. We've got stuff from all over the world showing up at the same time. So, we're getting ready for the harvest. The field is quite all ready to harvest. The Mormons didn't harvest anything. Harvest does not get less than 0.1% of the entire world population as a harvest. The activity level of the Mormon church is very low compared to the world population. So what you're seeing really is the beginning of God's harvest. And when God harvests something, he harvests it. I mean, when you harvest a field, how much are you supposed to get? The majority of it, right? the vast majority of it. So we're going to see records flooding from everywhere, coming and being undoubtable, unmistakable. Like there's not going to be anybody that can question the Book of Mormon at some point because all these other records are going to be, true, proving it true. I should have put this in there, but I forgot. If you haven't already looked at, go ahead and Google um, Native American DNA and coming from Europe, and you'll find that the current understanding is that all of the American, Indian tribes, the Native Americans, that they came from Europe. 10 years ago, that was the opposite. They were saying that none of them came from European DNA, and now they're saying all of them came from the European DNA. So, anyways, just something to look at. But science and these records and everything is just going to all start piling up in one direction and leading towards further light and knowledge. So again, that's all about the Mamuini, the tribes living up in the Michigan areas and whatnot. You can go ahead and get the apps, Apple Store and Google Play. There's lots more records to come. We don't even have probably a half of them or a third of them yet. And for those that are interested in knowing more about the records, I have started another podcast series. The podcast series is called Sacred and Spiritual Records, and we've just released episode 1A. Episode 1D will be all about these new records coming from the Indians. If you want to go ahead and start looking at some of that, we'll be discussing these different records, where they are, what they came from, how we got them. I know a lot of people aren't aware how many things are out there. This is where it started my numbering system. There's way more than 100 books out there that are spiritual records, and it's going to surprise you when you start on this. And they all lead to each other. If there's, whenever I'm teaching, I'm going to be, if there's a video series or a podcast series or a book, audio book that you can read or listen to instead of having to read the book, I'll tell you what's available. I'm not particularly fond of reading myself, but I'll do it. I've been through the Nemenhah record 3 times. And that's the one that's twice the size of the Book of Mormon. But if there's another route to do it where I can assemble the information faster, that's what I want for you guys. I want you guys to know how to get all the information. Ultimately, the important thing is learning how to go on the way, not necessarily going to book for information, but learning how to go straight to Heavenly Father, Jesus Christ, and all of them, to be able to taught by them. Don't be taught by man here on earth, be taught by them in the other realm. Anyways, this has been another episode of Truth Shall Come Forth. Please like, subscribe, and share, and we'll get the future episodes as soon as we can. Thank you.